An airport cleaner grabbed expensive medicine for a millionaire who had no wallet. Moments later, he fell in love, glanced at her hand, and made a shocking offer that left everyone breathless. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The fluorescent lights of Terminal C flickered slightly as Elena Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart past Gate 37. It was 3:17 a.m., that peculiar hour when airports exist in a liminal state, not quite night, not quite morning. A few travelers dozed uncomfortably across rows of connected seats, their carry-ons clutched protectively to their chests. The overnight security guards nodded at Elena as she passed, familiar with her presence during these ghostly hours. Elena had been working the graveyard shift at Lambert International for nearly 4 years now. At 32, she hadn't expected to still be cleaning floors and emptying trash bins, but life had a way of derailing even the most carefully laid plans. The night shift paid better, and with her mother's medical bills piling up, she couldn't afford to be particular. She had a bachelor's degree in education gathering dust while she scrubbed toilets and polished chrome fixtures, but there would be time for teaching later. Right now, her focus was keeping their modest 2-bedroom apartment and making sure her mother had everything she needed. As she approached the first-class lounge, Elena noticed a commotion. A tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit was frantically emptying the contents of his briefcase onto one of the leather couches. His movements were precise despite his obvious distress, each item carefully placed rather than haphazardly dumped. Elena slowed her cart, debating whether to proceed or wait until whatever was happening had resolved itself. "Sir, I understand your concerns, but without payment I simply cannot release the medication," a younger man in a white coat, presumably a pharmacist from the 24-hour prescription service near the international terminal, was saying. His tone was apologetic but firm. "This is absurd," the suited man replied, his voice carrying a slight accent Elena couldn't quite place. "I've just shown you identification confirming I am, indeed, Alexander Rothwell. The prescription is clearly in my name. I've explained that my wallet was stolen during my layover in Frankfurt. I have the police report right here." He held up his smartphone, displaying what appeared to be an official document. The pharmacist shifted uncomfortably. "I don't doubt your identity, Mr. Rothwell, but our policy is clear. The medication costs $1,700 and we require payment at the time of dispensing. Perhaps you could have someone wire you the money?" Alexander Rothwell's shoulders tensed. "As I've explained 3 times now, my executive assistant who would handle such matters is currently on a flight over the Pacific. I can't reach her for another 4 hours at minimum. I need this medication now." Elena found herself unconsciously moving closer, her cleaning forgotten. The desperation in the man's voice was palpable. Despite his composed exterior, she could see the slight tremor in his hands, the tightness around his eyes. "Sir, It's an immunosuppressant," Alexander interrupted, lowering his voice slightly. "Without it, my body will begin rejecting my transplanted heart within hours. I've already missed 1 dose due to the flight delays." The pharmacist faltered, genuine concern crossing his features, but he shook his head. "I'm truly sorry, Mr. Rothwell. I could lose my license if I dispense without payment. Company policy is absolutely clear on this matter." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, and Elena saw something cross his face. Not anger, but a flash of genuine fear quickly masked. When he opened his eyes again, his expression was perfectly neutral. "I understand. Thank you for your time." The pharmacist hesitated a moment longer, then carefully placed the small paper bag containing the medication back into his delivery case. He nodded once and walked away, casting a regretful glance back as he left. Elena watched as Alexander Rothwell methodically began returning items to his briefcase. A platinum pen, a leather-bound notebook, a tablet in an expensive-looking case, a passport with what looked like a gold emblem on the cover, and several folders with crisp edges. His movements were calm, controlled, but Elena had been observing people in moments of crisis long enough to recognize someone desperately trying to formulate a plan B. Without fully processing what she was doing, Elena abandoned her cleaning cart and approached him. "Excuse me, sir?" Alexander looked up, his piercing blue eyes momentarily unfocused before settling on her face. Up close, Elena realized he was older than she'd initially thought, probably in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair at his temples and fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Yes?" His tone was polite but distracted. Elena took a deep breath. "I couldn't help overhearing. About your medicine." A flash of something, irritation perhaps, or embarrassment, crossed his features. "It's nothing to concern yourself with. I'll sort it out." "I can help," Elena said simply, reaching into the pocket of her uniform. She pulled out her wallet, a worn leather billfold that had been a gift from her father before he passed. From it, she extracted a credit card. "I can pay for it." Alexander stared at her, genuine surprise replacing his careful composure. "I beg your pardon?" "I can pay for your medication," Elena repeated, her voice steadier than she felt. "You said you need it urgently." "I have," she hesitated, mentally calculating her remaining credit limit, "enough to cover it." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Young lady, that medication costs nearly $18,000. Elena nodded. "I know. I heard." She didn't mention that the sum represented more than half her annual salary, or that her credit card was supposed to be for emergencies only. This felt like an emergency, just not her own. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Elena glanced at the chair where the pharmacist had been sitting, where the bag with the medication had been tantalizingly close. "You said it's for your heart. That sounds important." For a long moment, Alexander seemed speechless, an occurrence Elena suspected was exceedingly rare for him. He studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. His gaze moved from her eyes to the airport cleaner's uniform she wore, the name tag that read Elena R., and back to her face again. "You're serious," he said finally, not a question but a realization. Elena nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Perhaps she was overstepping, or perhaps this extremely wealthy-looking man might be offended by her presumption. "I can call the pharmacist back," she offered, "if you want." Alexander was still studying her face. Why would an airport cleaner offer to spend what must be a significant sum on a complete stranger? The question wasn't accusatory, merely curious, but Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Because you need it," she said simply, "and I can help." Something shifted in Alexander's expression then, a subtle softening around his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond when his phone rang, a discreet, elegant tone. He glanced at the screen. "My assistant," he murmured, almost to himself, then looked back at Elena. "Excuse me for one moment." He answered the call, walking a few steps away. Elena couldn't make out his words, but his tone was clipped and precise. He ended the call quickly and returned to where she stood, awkwardly holding her credit card. "That was my assistant. She's arranged for an emergency wire transfer to the pharmacy's account. The medication should be released within minutes." A slight smile touched his lips. "But I find myself quite affected by your offer." Elena slipped her card back into her wallet, oddly relieved and slightly embarrassed. "I'm glad it worked out. May I ask your name? Your full name?" "Elena Rodriguez." "Elena," he repeated as if testing how it felt to say it. "I'm Alexander Rothwell." "I gathered that," she said, a small smile escaping despite her attempt to remain professional. "I would very much like to repay your kindness, or rather, your willingness to be kind, even though circumstances didn't require you to follow through." Elena shook her head. "That's not necessary, Mr. Rothwell. Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said with absolute certainty. "They wouldn't have." May I buy you a coffee? There's a cafe open near the international terminal. Elena gestured toward her abandoned cleaning cart. I'm working, Mr. Rothwell, but thank you. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Of course. When does your shift end, Ms. Rodriguez? Elena blinked, surprised by his persistence. At 6 a.m. Would you consider breakfast then? I have a 4-hour layover before my flight to Tokyo. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him appear younger and more approachable. I promise I'm not normally in the habit of inviting strangers to meals. But you were willing to help me in an extraordinary way, and I find myself curious about the person who would do such a thing. Before Elena could respond, the pharmacist reappeared, slightly out of breath as if he'd hurried back. Mr. Rothwell, I've just received confirmation of the wire transfer. I can release your medication now. Alexander nodded. Thank you. He accepted the bag, immediately opening it to examine the contents. Apparently satisfied, he placed it carefully in his briefcase, then returned his attention to Elena, one eyebrow raised in question. Elena hesitated. She normally went straight home after her shift, catching the 6:15 a.m. bus that would get her back to their apartment just as her mother was waking up. The home health aide didn't arrive until 8:00, and Elena liked to be there to help her mother with breakfast and her morning medications. But something about Alexander Rothwell's expression, a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite define, made her nod. Breakfast would be nice, she said, surprising herself. Alexander smiled again, and Elena was struck by how it seemed to illuminate his entire face. Excellent. Shall we say 6:15 at the Sky Lounge in Terminal A? I have a membership. Elena glanced down at her cleaner's uniform with its industrial stains and functional cut. I'm not sure they'd let me in dressed like this. They will, Alexander said with the easy confidence of someone unaccustomed to being refused. But if you're uncomfortable, there's also the grill, which is open to all passengers and airport staff. The grill would be better, Elena agreed. The grill at 6:15 then. He extended his hand and Elena shook it, noticing the contrast between her work-roughened palm and his smooth one. His grip was firm, but not overpowering. Thank you again, Ms. Rodriguez. Your kindness won't be forgotten. He gathered his briefcase and nodded once more before walking away toward the international terminal. Elena watched him go, still somewhat bewildered by the entire interaction. She shook her head slightly and returned to her cleaning cart, wondering what exactly had possessed her to offer her emergency credit card to a complete stranger, even one in medical distress, and then agree to have breakfast with him. As she resumed her cleaning rounds, Elena tried to dismiss the encounter from her mind, focusing instead on her tasks. But she found herself glancing at her watch more frequently than usual, counting down the hours until the end of her shift. Elena hurried through the employee locker room, grateful that she'd started keeping a change of clothes at work. Nothing fancy, just a simple navy blue blouse and dark jeans, but infinitely better than meeting Alexander Rothwell for breakfast in her stained uniform. She quickly splashed water on her face, applied a hint of mascara and lip balm, and ran a brush through her dark hair, releasing it from the practical bun she wore during shifts. Her reflection stared back at her. Warm brown eyes, high cheekbones courtesy of her Mexican heritage, a small scar above her right eyebrow from a childhood fall. Not glamorous, but presentable. Elena wasn't entirely sure why she cared about her appearance for a simple breakfast with a stranger. But something about Alexander Rothwell made her conscious of the contrast between them. As she made her way to the grill, Elena checked her phone. No messages from her mother or the night nurse, which was good news. Still, she sent a quick text. Running a bit late this morning. Everything okay? The response came seconds later. All fine. Your mother is still sleeping. Take your time. Relief flooded her. Elena rarely deviated from her routine, always rushing home to make sure her mother was comfortable before catching a few hours of sleep herself. This small departure felt oddly significant. Alexander was already at the grill when she arrived, seated at a corner table partially screened by potted plants. He'd shed his suit jacket, his crisp white shirt setting off his tanned skin. He rose when he spotted her, his smile warm and genuine. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm glad you could make it." His eyes took in her changed appearance with obvious appreciation, but his gaze remained respectful. "Please, call me Elena," she said, sliding into the chair he held out for her. "Elena," he agreed, "and I'm Alexander." A server appeared immediately, offering menus and coffee. Elena ordered simple scrambled eggs and toast, conscious of both her budget and the fact that she'd be trying to sleep soon. Alexander requested an elaborate omelet with a side of smoked salmon and fresh fruit. "So," he said once the server had gone, "you work the night shift?" Elena nodded. 4 years now. It pays better than days. And before that? She took a sip of her coffee, surprisingly good for airport fare. "I was finishing my education degree. I taught kindergarten for a year before my mother got sick." She didn't know why she was sharing these details with a stranger, but something about Alexander's focused attention made it easy to talk to him. "I'm sorry to hear about your mother," he said, and the genuine concern in his voice surprised her. "What condition does she have, if you don't mind my asking?" "Multiple sclerosis. It progressed rapidly. She needs full-time care now." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "And you provide that care?" "Some of it. We have home health aides during the day while I sleep, and I take over evenings and weekends. It works out." "That sounds exhausting." Elena shrugged. "It's what needs to be done." She realized this could sound self-pitying and quickly changed the subject. "What about you? You mentioned Tokyo?" Alexander allowed the shift in conversation, though his eyes suggested he hadn't missed her discomfort. "I'm heading to a business conference. I own a pharmaceutical research company, Rothwell Innovations." That explained the expensive suit and ease with large sums of money. "What kind of research?" "We focus primarily on rare diseases and disorders with limited treatment options. It's not always profitable, but it's necessary work." His eyes lit up as he spoke, revealing a passion that transcended business concerns. "Right now, we're in the final testing phases of a new therapy for a rare form of muscular dystrophy that primarily affects children." Their food arrived, and Elena watched as Alexander effortlessly charmed the server, asking about her children when he noticed the family photo she kept in her order pad. The woman beamed as she set down their plates, offering to bring extra jam for Elena's toast without being asked. "You're good with people," Elena observed after the server left. Alexander's smile turned slightly rueful. "A necessary skill in my position, though I find it comes more naturally with some than others." His eyes met hers across the table, holding for a moment before he returned his attention to his breakfast. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Elena found herself studying his hands, strong, well-maintained, but with small nicks and calluses that suggested he hadn't always been a man who wore bespoke suits. "May I ask you something?" Alexander said suddenly, setting down his fork. Elena nodded, curious. "Why did you offer to pay for my medication? The truth, please. It was an extraordinary gesture, particularly from someone who—" He hesitated, clearly searching for a delicate way to phrase it. "From someone who cleans airport floors for a living?" Elena supplied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "From someone who likely works very hard for her money," Alexander corrected gently. $18,000 isn't a small sum for most people." Elena considered the question. "My father died when I was 14, she said finally. "He had a heart attack at work. The company first aid kit was missing the aspirin that might have saved him, and the ambulance took too long." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "I guess I've always wondered if things might have been different if someone had helped him. When I saw you needed heart medication urgently, it just seemed like the right thing to do." Alexander was watching her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "I'm sorry about your father," he said quietly, "and I'm honored by your kindness. Not many would have done what you were willing to do." Elena felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "Anyone would have—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "They wouldn't have. Trust me on this, Elena. What you offered was extraordinary." Before she could respond, his phone chimed with a message. Alexander glanced at it, frowning slightly. "My apologies. I need to respond to this." His fingers flew across the screen, composing what appeared to be a lengthy email. Elena took the opportunity to finish her eggs, oddly comfortable with the silence between them. When Alexander set his phone down, his expression had shifted, becoming more serious. "Elena, I have a proposition for you." She raised an eyebrow, curious but wary. "I'm in need of a personal assistant for my time here in the States. My regular assistant is excellent, but she's based in our London office and can't always be physically present when needed. Your willingness to help a stranger suggests you're both resourceful and ethical, qualities I value highly." Elena blinked, caught off guard. "You want to hire me? But you don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Alexander countered. "I know you're educated, articulate, and willing to help others at significant personal cost. I know you manage complex scheduling between your work and caring for your mother, and I suspect you could use the additional income." Elena felt a flash of indignation at his presumption, quickly followed by uncomfortable acknowledgement of its accuracy. "I have a job," she said, though even to her own ears it sounded like a weak protest, "one that makes use of perhaps 10% of your capabilities." His gaze was direct but not unkind. "I'm offering you 3 months of employment with a salary of $15,000 per month." Elena nearly choked on her coffee. $15,000, that's ridiculous. "It's the standard rate for executive assistants with top qualifications in my industry," Alexander replied calmly. "The position would involve travel, primarily between New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. But I'd ensure you had time to return home regularly to check on your mother. All expenses would be covered, of course, and I can arrange for additional home health care during your absences." Elena's head was spinning. The amount he'd casually offered was more than she made in 6 months of night shifts. It could pay for her mother's treatment and still leave enough to start rebuilding their depleted savings. But it seemed too good to be true. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "There must be hundreds of qualified assistants you could hire." Alexander considered her question with obvious care. "Because I trust my instincts, and they're rarely wrong about people. Because I suspect you're wasted cleaning floors when you could be doing something that engages your mind. And," he added with a hint of a smile, "because I find I enjoy your company." Elena felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest at those last words, quickly suppressed. This was business, not whatever else her imagination might suggest. "I don't know the first thing about being an executive assistant," she admitted. "You can learn. The technical aspects are relatively straightforward. What can't be taught is judgment, discretion, and integrity, qualities you've already demonstrated." The server returned to refill their coffee cups, giving Elena a moment to collect her thoughts. The offer was simultaneously tempting and terrifying. She'd be stepping completely outside her comfort zone, entering a world she knew nothing about, with a man she'd just met. "I would need to make arrangements for my mother," she said, surprising herself with the implicit acceptance in her words. Alexander nodded as if her agreement had been a foregone conclusion. "Of course. I can have a home healthcare service interview with you later today. I'll be in the city for 3 days before we'd need to leave for New York." "And after the 3 months?" Elena asked, practical concerns asserting themselves. "That would be entirely up to you. If the arrangement works well, I'd be happy to extend it indefinitely. If not, you'd return home with excellent references and enough savings to give yourself some breathing room while you decide on your next steps." It was a generous offer, possibly life-changing. Yet Elena hesitated, searching for the catch. "I'd need time to think about it. Naturally. Alexander reached into his pocket and extracted a business card, sliding it across the table. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering in a subtle charcoal gray. My direct number is on the back. Take today to consider. I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning. I have arrangements to make if you accept. Elena picked up the card, turning it over in her hands. It felt substantial, expensive, like everything else about Alexander Rothwell. "This is very sudden," she said, voicing the thought that had been circling in her mind. Alexander's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I make decisions quickly when I'm confident in them. It served me well in business." He glanced at his watch, a subtle but clearly expensive timepiece. "I should let you get home. You need rest, and I have calls to make before my next flight." They both stood, and Elena suddenly felt awkward, unsure of the proper protocol for ending a meeting that had begun as a thank-you breakfast and somehow morphed into a job offer. Alexander solved the dilemma by extending his hand. "Thank you for joining me, Elena. I hope to hear from you soon." His handshake was firm and warm, lingering just a fraction longer than strictly necessary. As their hands parted, his fingers brushed against hers in what might have been an accident or might have been something more deliberate. The moment passed too quickly for Elena to analyze it. "Thank you for breakfast," she replied, tucking his card securely into her purse. "I'll call you tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Elena caught a glimpse of Alexander watching her go, his expression thoughtful. The intensity of his gaze sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Whatever she decided about his offer, she suspected that meeting Alexander Rothwell had irrevocably altered the trajectory of her carefully ordered life. The bus ride home gave Elena time to process what had just happened. She stared out the window as the city gradually transformed from the sleek architecture of the airport district to the more modest buildings of her neighborhood. Alexander Rothwell's business card seemed to burn in her purse, a tangible reminder of the surreal interaction. $15,000 a month. The figure kept repeating in her mind, almost too large to comprehend. In 1 month, she would earn more than she currently made in half a year. The practical part of her brain immediately began calculating what that money could do: pay off her mother's medical debt, replace their aging car, maybe even set aside something for the future. The less practical part wondered if there was some hidden catch she wasn't seeing. Elena's apartment building came into view, a faded brick structure with window air conditioning units protruding like metallic growths. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe, with a super who actually fixed things when they broke. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to 3C, her legs heavy with fatigue after the long night shift. "Mom, I'm home," she called softly as she entered, not wanting to wake Maria if she was still sleeping. "In the kitchen, Carino," her mother replied, her voice strong despite her condition. Elena found Maria Rodriguez seated at their small kitchen table in her wheelchair, sipping tea while Lucia, the morning home health aide, prepared eggs at the stove. At 52, Maria still retained the beauty that had turned heads in her youth, though MS had etched lines of pain around her eyes and mouth that no amount of positive thinking could erase. "You're later than usual," Maria observed, her dark eyes, so like Elena's own, missing nothing. "And you changed clothes." Elena kissed her mother's cheek. "I had breakfast with someone." "A man?" Maria's expression brightened with immediate interest. "Handsome?" "Mama," Elena sighed, though she couldn't help smiling. "It wasn't like that." Maria hummed skeptically, exchanging a knowing look with Lucia. "So not handsome, then?" Elena thought of Alexander's striking blue eyes, the distinguished touch of silver at his temples, the way his smile transformed his whole face. He was... Yes, I suppose he was handsome. "Aha!" Maria declared triumphantly. "Finally, she notices a man exists. I was beginning to worry." Lucia laughed softly as she set a plate of eggs in front of Maria. "I'll head out now, Elena. Everything's been fine this morning. Maria took her medication at 6, and I've already helped her with her exercises." "Thank you, Lucia," Elena said gratefully, walking the aide to the door. When she returned to the kitchen, Maria was watching her with that penetrating gaze that had always made it impossible for Elena to hide anything as a child. "So," Maria said, "tell me about this handsome man who kept you from rushing home to check on your troublesome mother." Elena pulled out a chair and sat heavily, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "It's a long story." "I have nowhere to be," Maria replied, gesturing to her wheelchair with dry humor. Elena told her about Alexander, about the incident with his medication, the breakfast invitation, and finally, the job offer. Maria listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful. "Dios mío," she breathed when Elena finished. 15,000 a month? That's crazy, right? Elena ran a hand through her hair. It has to be too good to be true. Maria tilted her head. Why? You're intelligent, educated, capable. Why shouldn't someone recognize that and pay accordingly? Because people like Alexander Rothwell don't just offer random airport cleaners high-paying jobs based on one interaction. The doubt that had been simmering beneath the surface emerged fully. What if he wants something else? The implication hung in the air. Maria's eyes narrowed. Did he make any inappropriate suggestions? No, Elena admitted. He was perfectly respectful. Professional even. And he knows you care for me? That you have responsibilities here? Yes. He said he'd arrange for additional care when I needed to travel. Maria was quiet for a moment, absently tracing the rim of her teacup. Show me his card. Elena retrieved Alexander's business card from her purse, handing it to her mother. Maria examined it carefully, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. Rothwell Innovations, she read aloud. I've heard of them. There was a story on PBS about a breakthrough treatment they developed for a rare children's disease. They provided it at cost to families without adequate insurance. Elena remembered Alexander's passion when he'd spoken about his company's research. It had seemed genuine, not the manufactured enthusiasm of a corporate figurehead. Look him up, Maria suggested, nodding toward Elena's laptop on the counter. A quick internet search confirmed Alexander Rothwell was exactly who he claimed to be. Images showed him at charity galas, industry conferences, and receiving awards for his company's humanitarian work. Articles described him as brilliant but intensely private, a visionary in pharmaceutical research, and one of the most eligible bachelors in the industry. His estimated net worth made Elena blink twice to confirm she'd read the number correctly. Well, he's certainly not hurting for money, she murmured, turning the laptop so her mother could see. Maria scanned the screen, then looked up at Elena with a determined expression. You should take the job. What? Just like that? Why not? It's 3 months. If it doesn't work out, you come home. If it does, Maria shrugged. Maybe you find something better than scrubbing airport floors at 3 in the morning. But what about you? Who would take care of you? Maria's face softened. Me, hija. You've put your life on hold for me for 4 years. You think I don't see the sacrifice? You should be teaching children, building your own life, not emptying trash cans and rushing home to make sure I've taken my pills. Mama? No, Maria interrupted firmly. Listen to me. If this man can afford to pay you such a salary, he can afford to provide excellent care for me while you're away. And with that money, we could finally get ahead of these medical bills instead of always drowning in them. Elena couldn't argue with her mother's logic, but anxiety still gnawed at her. What if I'm terrible at it? I don't know the first thing about being an executive assistant. You've been managing my medical care, our finances, and working full-time for years. You organize everything in this household while chronically sleep-deprived. I think you can handle taking phone calls and scheduling meetings. Maria reached across the table to squeeze Elena's hand. You're capable of far more than you give yourself credit for, Carino. Elena squeezed back, blinking against unexpected tears. The weight of her mother's confidence was both reassuring and terrifying. "I'd need to quit my job at the airport." "That awful job that's slowly killing you?" "Oh no, what a terrible loss," Maria replied with exaggerated dismay, making Elena laugh despite herself. "I'd be traveling with a man I barely know." "A very wealthy, handsome man who recognized your worth after one conversation," Maria corrected, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Who knows? Maybe you'll fall madly in love and give me those grandchildren I've been waiting for." "Mama!" Elena groaned, but her mother just laughed. "I'm teasing, mostly." Maria's expression grew serious again. "Elena, how long has it been since you've done something for yourself? Something that wasn't about survival or taking care of me?" Elena couldn't answer. The truth was, she couldn't remember. "Take the job," Maria said softly. "See where it leads. The worst that happens is you come back in 3 months with enough money to breathe a little easier. The best." She smiled. "Well, who knows?" Elena looked down at Alexander's business card still on the table between them. The decision seemed to crystallize in her mind, fear and excitement coexisting in equal measure. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll call him tomorrow." "Call him now," Maria urged. "A man like that won't wait around." Elena glanced at the clock. "It's not even noon. He'll be on his flight to Tokyo." "Then leave a message. Show initiative." Elena hesitated, then reached for her phone. Before she could overthink it, she dialed the number on the back of Alexander's card, expecting to leave a voicemail. To her surprise, he answered on the second ring. "Alexander Rothwell." Elena faltered momentarily, caught off guard. "Mr. Rothwell, it's Elena Rodriguez, from this morning." "Elena." His voice warmed noticeably. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. And please, it's Alexander." "I thought you'd be on your flight," she explained, suddenly nervous. "Delayed due to mechanical issues. These things happen." He sounded entirely unperturbed by the inconvenience. "Have you made a decision about my offer?" Elena took a deep breath, catching her mother's encouraging nod from across the table. "Yes, I'd like to accept the position." There was a brief pause. "Excellent," Alexander said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "I'm very pleased to hear that." "I should warn you," Elena added quickly, "I have no experience as an executive assistant. As I said before, the technical aspects can be learned. It's the less tangible qualities that matter, and those you already possess." The background noise on his end increased, and he paused. "I apologize, Elena, but they're calling for boarding. Can you meet me at the Grand Hotel tomorrow at 10 a.m.? We can discuss the details then and begin making arrangements for your mother's care." "Yes, I can do that." "Perfect. I look forward to it." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Elena. I think this arrangement will benefit us both." The call ended and Elena set down her phone, feeling slightly dazed. "Well?" Maria prompted. "I start tomorrow," Elena said, the reality of her decision beginning to sink in. "I'm meeting him at the Grand Hotel to work out the details." Maria clapped her hands together. "The Grand, I knew it. Only the best for Signor Rothwell, eh?" Elena couldn't help laughing at her mother's enthusiasm. "Don't get carried away, Mama. This is a job, not a fairy tale." Of course," Maria agreed, though her expression remained decidedly dreamy. "But wouldn't it be something if it were both?" Elena shook her head, but a small secret part of her, a part she hadn't acknowledged in years, wondered the same thing. She remembered Alexander's intense gaze, the way his eyes had lingered on hers across the breakfast table, and felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "I need sleep," she said firmly, pushing the feeling aside. "I have to be at my best tomorrow." As she headed to her bedroom, Elena heard her mother murmuring a prayer of thanks. Despite her exhaustion, a new energy hummed through her veins, a sense of possibility that had been absent for far too long. Whatever happened next, Elena knew her life had changed course. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, she was stepping toward something rather than merely surviving. She set her alarm, placed Alexander's business card on her nightstand, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The Grand Hotel lived up to its name. Elena stepped into the marble-floored lobby, momentarily overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, while tasteful floral arrangements adorned tables that looked like they belonged in museums rather than hotel lobbies. She had made an effort with her appearance, wearing her best black dress, simple but elegant, with a cardigan and low heels, her hair loose around her shoulders. Even so, she felt conspicuously out of place among the well-heeled guests and immaculately uniformed staff. Elena approached the front desk, nervously clutching her small purse. "I'm here to meet Mr. Alexander Rothwell." The receptionist's polite smile warmed with genuine delight. "Ah, yes. Mr. Rothwell mentioned you would be arriving. He's in the Regency suite. Jason will escort you." She nodded toward a young man in hotel livery who materialized at Elena's elbow. The elevator ride to the penthouse level was silent, save for Jason's brief explanation of the hotel's amenities. Elena tried to calm her racing heart, reminding herself that this was a business meeting, nothing more. The Regency suite, when Jason admitted her, turned out to be larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while tasteful furnishings in cream and navy created an atmosphere of subdued luxury. Elena. Alexander emerged from what appeared to be an adjoining study, dressed in charcoal slacks and a pale blue shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. "Right on time. Thank you, Jason." The young man nodded and withdrew, leaving them alone. Alexander gestured toward a sitting area near the windows. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Would you like coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be nice, thank you," Elena replied, taking a seat on a plush sofa. She noticed several folders and a laptop arranged on the coffee table, suggesting Alexander had been preparing for their meeting. He poured coffee from a silver service already set out, handing her a delicate porcelain cup. "Did you rest well? Night shifts can wreak havoc on one's circadian rhythms." The question caught her off guard, not the inquiry itself, but the genuine concern behind it. "Well enough, thank you. My body's adjusted to the schedule over the years." Alexander nodded, taking a seat across from her. "One of the benefits of this position will be a return to more natural sleeping patterns. Speaking of benefits," he continued smoothly, opening one of the folders, "I've prepared an overview of what the position entails, along with compensation details and a draft contract for your review." He handed her several pages of neatly printed text. Elena scanned the document, her eyes widening at the comprehensive benefits package: full health insurance that could include her mother, generous vacation time, a clothing allowance, and the previously mentioned salary of $15,000 per month, which, she noticed, was listed as a base amount subject to performance bonuses. "This is very generous," she said carefully. "It's standard for an executive assistant at my level," Alexander replied with a slight shrug, perhaps slightly above standard, given the sudden nature of the position and the expectation of immediate travel. Elena continued reading, noting the detailed job description that included scheduling, correspondence management, some basic research tasks, travel arrangements, and other duties as required. The last item seemed vague, but the rest was straightforward enough. "The contract is for 3 months initially," Alexander explained, "with an option to extend by mutual agreement. You'll notice there's a substantial completion bonus should you fulfill the entire term." Elena found the clause he mentioned, an additional $20,000 payable upon completion of the 3-month period. The figure made her blink. "Do you have any questions so far?" Alexander asked, watching her reaction closely. "Several," Elena admitted. "First, about my mother's care." "Ah, yes. Alexander reached for another folder. I've taken the liberty of researching the top home healthcare agencies in the city. This one, he indicated a glossy brochure, specializes in MS patients and can provide round-the-clock care when you're traveling. They come highly recommended and have excellent client reviews. Of course, the final decision is yours and we can explore other options if you prefer. Elena leafed through the brochure, impressed despite herself. The agency appeared to offer exactly what her mother would need, with specialized caregivers trained specifically in multiple sclerosis management. "You've done your homework," she observed. A smile touched Alexander's lips. "I believe in being thorough. Your mother's well-being is obviously a priority for you, which makes it a priority for me as well. And the cost? Would be covered entirely as part of your compensation package," he assured her. "Consider it a necessary business expense that allows you to fulfill your role effectively." Elena set down the brochure, studying Alexander's face. "May I ask you something candidly, Mr. Rothwell?" "Alexander, please." "And yes, of course." "Why me? I still don't understand why you'd offer this position to someone with no experience based on a single interaction in an airport." Alexander leaned back slightly, considering her question. "I've built my company on instinct, Elena, on recognizing potential where others might not look. It's served me well." He paused, his gaze direct and unwavering. "You showed exceptional character and judgment in our brief interaction. You were willing to extend yourself significantly to help a stranger in need, with no expectation of reward or recognition. Those qualities are exceedingly rare and infinitely more valuable to me than technical experience, which can be acquired quickly by someone with your obvious intelligence." His explanation was reasonable, yet Elena sensed there was more he wasn't saying. Before she could probe further, Alexander continued. "There's also the simple fact that I liked you. We seemed to communicate well, and since you'll be working closely with me, that personal compatibility matters." His eyes met hers directly. "I assure you, my interest is professional, if that was a concern." Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly. "I didn't mean to imply—" "No offense taken," Alexander said smoothly. "It's a fair question. This arrangement does require a certain level of trust on both sides." Elena nodded, returning her attention to the contract. The terms were clear and far more favorable than she could have hoped for. If she was being honest with herself, she had already decided to accept the position. This meeting was merely about addressing her practical concerns. "About the travel," she began. "How often would we be away from the city?" "Initially, quite frequently," Alexander replied. "After Tokyo, I have commitments in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and briefly in London. However, I've restructured the schedule to include returns to this city every 7 to 10 days, allowing you time with your mother. You'd have most weekends free unless there's an urgent situation." "And my duties would primarily be administrative?" "Primarily, yes. Managing my schedule, coordinating with various departments and external partners, handling correspondence, some light research. Occasionally, you might attend meetings with me to take notes or follow up on action items." He smiled slightly. "I suspect you'll find it less physically demanding than cleaning airport terminals, though perhaps more mentally taxing." Elena couldn't help returning his smile. "I think I can handle mental taxation. It's been a while since I've used my brain for something more challenging than calculating cleaning solution ratios." Alexander's expression warmed with approval. "I have no doubt you'll excel." He reached for his coffee cup, then paused. "There is one aspect of the position I should mention. Discretion is paramount. You'll be privy to sensitive business information, research developments, and occasionally personal matters. Absolute confidentiality is essential." "Of course," Elena agreed without hesitation. "I understand." "Excellent." Alexander set down his cup and leaned forward slightly. "Now, practicalities. If you accept the position, we would leave for New York the day after tomorrow. My Tokyo trip has been rescheduled due to the conference being extended, which gives us a day to prepare. You'll need appropriate attire for business settings. I've arranged for a personal shopper at Neiman Marcus this afternoon, if that's acceptable." Elena blinked at the casual way he mentioned what would undoubtedly be an expensive shopping expedition. "That's very generous, but it's a business expense," Alexander interrupted gently. "Your appearance will reflect on the company. I'm not suggesting anything extravagant, just professional attire suitable for the environments we'll be in. The clothing allowance in your contract covers it." Put that way, it was hard to argue. Still, the thought of shopping at Neiman Marcus, a store she'd walked past but never entered, was slightly terrifying. "I've also arranged for this," Alexander continued, sliding a small leather case across the coffee table. Elena opened it to find a sleek smartphone, far more advanced than her basic model. "Company phone. It's already programmed with necessary contacts and synchronized with my calendar. You'll find the user guide inside, along with login credentials for company email and other systems." The thoughtfulness of his preparations impressed her. Alexander had clearly anticipated most of her practical concerns and addressed them in advance. The remaining question was whether she was truly ready for such a dramatic life change. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Elena, I understand this is a significant decision. If you need more time—" "No," she interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I don't need more time. I accept the position." Alexander's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features, erasing the careful reserve he typically maintained. "I'm very pleased to hear that." He extended his hand across the table. When Elena took it, his grip was warm and firm. For just a moment, as their hands clasped, she felt a subtle charge pass between them, something beyond the professional arrangement they were confirming. Alexander's eyes flickered briefly to her bare ring finger, an observation so quick she might have imagined it, before he released her hand. "We should celebrate," he declared, standing. "Are you free for lunch? There's an excellent restaurant downstairs." Elena hesitated. "Actually, I should check on my mother and begin making arrangements. Plus, if I'm going shopping this afternoon—" Alexander nodded immediately. "Of course. Practical considerations first." He wrote an address and time on a hotel notepad and handed it to her. "The personal shopper will meet you here at 2. Her name is Sophie, and she's excellent at her job. Just tell her what you need, and she'll handle the rest." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim wallet, extracting a black credit card that he placed beside the note. "Use this for the purchases. It's a company card." Elena stared at the card, its matte surface embossed with platinum lettering. "I can't—" "You can, and you should," Alexander said firmly. "This is business, Elena. The sooner you become comfortable with that, the more effective you'll be in this role." Something in his tone, not unkind but brooking no argument, made Elena realize this was her first test as his assistant. She nodded, carefully picking up the card. "Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow morning then?" 9 a.m. back here. We'll spend the day getting you oriented to the company's operations and my current projects before we fly to New York the following morning." Alexander walked her to the door, his hand briefly touching the small of her back in a gesture that managed to be both courteous and slightly proprietary. "Until tomorrow, Elena." As the elevator descended to the lobby, Elena leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. In the space of 48 hours, her life had been completely upended. She felt a dizzying mixture of excitement, anxiety, and something else, a flutter in her chest whenever Alexander looked at her with those intense blue eyes. Strictly professional, she reminded herself firmly. Whatever spark she might feel, Alexander Rothwell had been clear about the nature of their relationship. She was his employee, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome, intelligent, and unexpectedly kind was irrelevant. As she exited the hotel, stepping into the bright morning sunlight, Elena couldn't quite suppress a smile. Whatever lay ahead, it would certainly be more interesting than cleaning airport floors at 3 a.m. Elena had never felt more out of place in her life. Neiman Marcus's polished marble floors, soft lighting, and discreetly positioned security guards created an atmosphere that screamed exclusivity. Designer names she'd only seen in magazines adorned displays of clothing whose price tags could have covered her rent for months. "Ms. Rodriguez?" A stylish woman with a sleek bob and bold red lipstick approached, her smile professional but warm. "I'm Sophie Winters. Mr. Rothwell arranged for me to assist you today." "Yes, thank you for meeting me," Elena replied, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Sophie's expert eye assessed Elena from head to toe, though without the judgment Elena had feared. "Mr. Rothwell mentioned you need a complete professional wardrobe for travel and business settings. Did he give you any specific parameters?" "Not really, just appropriate attire for the environments we'll be in." Elena felt awkward quoting Alexander's words. "Understood. And your personal style preferences?" Elena hesitated. "I don't really have. That is, I haven't had many occasions for business attire." Sophie nodded without a trace of condescension. "Then we'll start with versatile classics and find what suits you best. Mr. Rothwell's female executives tend to favor elegant simplicity, quality materials, excellent tailoring, minimal trends. Does that sound reasonable?" "Yes, perfect." Elena relaxed slightly, appreciating Sophie's matter-of-fact approach. "Excellent. I've reserved a private suite for you. We'll have items brought in and you can try everything in comfort." Sophie led her to an elevator that required a key card, then down a hushed corridor to a room that resembled a luxurious living room more than a changing area. A champagne bucket sat on a side table, alongside an artful arrangement of fresh fruit and pastries. "Please make yourself comfortable," Sophie said, gesturing to the plush seating. "Would you like champagne or perhaps coffee while we discuss your needs?" "Coffee, please," Elena replied, perching on the edge of a cream-colored sofa. "Black." While Sophie arranged for refreshments, Elena gathered her courage and withdrew Alexander's credit card from her purse. When Sophie returned, Elena handed it to her with a directness born of determination to overcome her discomfort. "Mr. Rothwell provided this for the purchases." Sophie accepted the card with a nod. Of course. She didn't seem surprised, which helped ease Elena's awkwardness. "Now let's discuss what you'll need. Mr. Rothwell's schedule often includes business meetings, industry events, and occasionally formal gatherings. We should prepare for all scenarios." The next 3 hours passed in a whirlwind of fabrics, styles, and fittings. Sophie proved to be not only knowledgeable but intuitive, quickly identifying what flattered Elena's slender frame and warm coloring. She steered Elena away from anything too flashy or trendy, focusing instead on elegant pieces that could be mixed and matched for maximum versatility. Elena found herself gradually relaxing, even enjoying the process as Sophie explained the principles of building a capsule wardrobe. They selected several tailored pantsuits in navy, charcoal, and a subtle herringbone, pencil skirts in complementary colors, silk blouses that draped beautifully, a few dresses that could transition from day to evening with the right accessories, and a stunning midnight blue gown that Sophie insisted was necessary for the inevitable gala or formal dinner. When it came to shoes, Elena initially balked at the prices, but Sophie was adamant. "Quality footwear is an investment, not an expense. You'll be on your feet frequently, and nothing ruins a professional appearance faster than discomfort." They selected classic pumps in varying heights, comfortable yet elegant flats, and ankle boots for more casual settings. Accessories followed: a structured leather handbag, a smaller evening clutch, scarves that could add color to neutral outfits, and subtle jewelry that wouldn't compete with the clean lines of the clothing. By the time they finished, Elena felt overwhelmed but satisfied. Sophie arranged for everything to be tailored overnight and delivered to Elena's apartment the following morning, packaged in garment bags ready for travel. As they completed the transaction, Elena caught a glimpse of the total and nearly gasped. The amount would have once represented several months' salary. Sophie noticed her reaction and smiled reassuringly. "This is quite standard for an executive wardrobe, Ms. Rodriguez, and these pieces will serve you well for years with proper care." "Thank you for your help," Elena said sincerely. "I would have been completely lost on my own. That's why I'm here." Sophie handed her a business card. "Please call if you have any questions about styling or care, and perhaps we can schedule another appointment in a few weeks, once you've had a chance to see what works best for your new role." Outside the store, Elena took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling as though she'd survived some strange initiation ritual. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Alexander. "How did the shopping expedition go?" She hesitated, then typed, "Successfully, I think." Sophie was very helpful. His response came almost immediately. "Excellent. Did you find everything you needed?" "Yes, thank you. It was educational." A pause, then, "I hope not too overwhelming. First step in a new world." Elena smiled at his perceptiveness. "A bit overwhelming, but in a good way. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. As am I." "Rest well, Elena." She slipped her phone back into her purse, that now familiar flutter returning to her chest. With a renewed sense of purpose, Elena headed home to share the day's developments with her mother and begin preparing for her new life. Maria was ecstatic about the shopping expedition, insisting on hearing every detail. "Neiman Marcus, with a personal shopper, like in the movies." Her enthusiasm was contagious, and Elena found herself laughing as she described Sophie's efficient expertise. "And he just gave you his credit card? Just like that?" Maria marveled. "It's a company card, Mama, for business expenses." "Still," Maria's eyes twinkled, "there's something very romantic about a man buying a woman beautiful clothes." "It's not romantic," Elena protested. "It's practical. I need to look the part." Maria hummed skeptically. "And this Alexander, he is handsome, you said?" "That's hardly relevant," Elena replied, but couldn't quite meet her mother's knowing gaze. The afternoon passed quickly as Elena called the home health care agency Alexander had recommended. To her surprise, they were already expecting her call and had prepared a detailed care plan for Maria based on information Alexander had apparently provided. A supervisor would visit the next morning to finalize arrangements and introduce the primary caregivers who would be supporting Maria during Elena's absences. As evening approached, Elena began packing essentials for the upcoming trip, following the guidance Sophie had provided about travel-friendly items. Her old suitcase looked embarrassingly shabby, but it would have to do until she received her first paycheck. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text, but a call from Alexander. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said when she answered. "Not at all, I'm just packing." "About that." There was a smile in his voice. "You should be receiving a delivery shortly. A few additional items you might need." As if on cue, her doorbell rang. Elena opened it to find a delivery person holding several bags and boxes emblazoned with the logos of high-end luggage and travel accessory brands. "What is this?" she asked Alexander, stepping aside to allow the delivery person to set everything down in her living room. "Just a few necessities," he replied casually. "Proper luggage, a travel adapter, a document organizer, practical things." Elena stared at the elegant navy suitcase set, the buttery leather travel wallet, and various other accessories. "This is too much, Alexander." "It's not a gift, Elena. It's equipment for your job," he corrected gently. "Think of it as providing a carpenter with proper tools. I should have mentioned it earlier, but it slipped my mind until I was reviewing the travel itinerary." Put that way, it was difficult to object. Still, Elena felt a nagging discomfort at accepting so much so quickly. "I'll reimburse the company from my salary." A brief pause. "If that makes you more comfortable, certainly, though it's unnecessary." Maria wheeled herself into the living room, eyes widening at the delivery. "What's all this?" Elena covered the phone's microphone. "Travel items from Mr. Rothwell." Then to Alexander. "My mother just came in. Would you like to say hello? She's curious about you." Another pause, longer this time. "I'd be delighted." Elena handed the phone to her mother, an unexpected nervousness fluttering in her stomach as the two people who mattered most in her very different worlds connected for the first time. "Mr. Rothwell, I'm Maria Rodriguez. Thank you for giving my daughter this wonderful opportunity." Maria's face lit up as she listened to his response. "Yes, she is very capable. Oh, I'm managing quite well, thank you for asking. That sounds like an excellent agency. No concerns, I want Elena to spread her wings a bit. Yes, she mentioned that." Elena busied herself examining the luggage, trying not to eavesdrop too obviously, but she couldn't help noticing her mother's delighted laughter at something Alexander said. "It was lovely speaking with you too, Mr. Rothwell. I'll pass you back to Elena now." Maria handed over the phone with an approving nod and mouthed, "I like him." "Your mother is charming," Alexander said when Elena returned to the call. "I can see where you get your warmth." "She likes you," Elena replied, oddly pleased by this development. "High praise indeed. Mothers are excellent judges of character." There was a smile in his voice. "I won't keep you any longer. You must have much to arrange before tomorrow. I just wanted to ensure the delivery arrived safely." "It did. Thank you. It was very thoughtful." "Not at all. Get some rest, Elena. Tomorrow will be busy." A brief pause. "I'm looking forward to working with you." "Me too," she admitted, surprised by how true it was. After they disconnected, Maria wheeled closer, her expression knowingly smug. "He sounds wonderful, and his voice, so distinguished." "He's my employer, Mama," Elena reminded her, though she couldn't quite suppress a smile. "For now," Maria replied enigmatically. "Now, help me into bed, then start packing properly. You have a new life waiting, and it begins tomorrow." Later, as Elena carefully transferred her few personal items into the elegant new luggage, she allowed herself to acknowledge the excitement building inside her. In less than 24 hours, she would step into a world she'd barely glimpsed before. A world of luxury hotels, business-class flights, and high-stakes meetings. It should have terrified her, yet somehow, knowing Alexander would be guiding her through it made the prospect more thrilling than frightening. The midnight blue gown Sophie had insisted on including in her wardrobe hung on her closet door, a tangible symbol of the transformation underway. Elena ran her fingers across the silky material, wondering what occasion would call for such an elegant piece, and who might see her wearing it. "Strictly professional," she reminded herself aloud, but her reflection in the mirror, eyes bright with anticipation, cheeks flushed with excitement, suggested her heart might not be entirely convinced. Elena arrived at the Grand Hotel precisely at 8:45 a.m., dressed in one of her new outfits, a charcoal pencil skirt, ivory silk blouse, and navy blazer that Sophie had assured her was corporate perfect. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup subtle but polished, and she carried the structured leather handbag containing her new company phone and a leather-bound notebook. The overnight transformation from airport cleaner to executive assistant was so complete that the same doorman who had barely glanced at her the previous day now held the door with a respectful, "Good morning, ma'am." As instructed, she took the elevator to the penthouse level and knocked on the Regency suite door, her heartbeat quickening with both nerves and anticipation. Alexander opened the door himself, his smile warm with approval as he took in her appearance. "Good morning, Elena. You look perfectly appropriate." Coming from anyone else, it might have sounded like faint praise, but Elena understood the comment for what it was. Confirmation that she looked the part, exactly as intended. "Thank you," she replied, stepping into the suite. She noticed it had been transformed overnight into a makeshift office. A sleek laptop sat open on the dining table, which was now covered with neatly arranged folders, documents, and what appeared to be product samples in pharmaceutical packaging. "Coffee?" Alexander offered, already moving toward the service that had become familiar to Elena. Today he wore a navy suit with a subtle pinstripe, the crisp white of his shirt contrasting with his tanned skin. Though his attire was undeniably formal, there was something more relaxed about his demeanor this morning, as if her acceptance of the position had eased some inner tension. "Please," Elena said, setting her bag on a chair and approaching the table. "You've been busy, I see." "I'm an early riser," Alexander replied, handing her a coffee cup. "And there's quite a bit to cover before our flight tomorrow. Why don't we start with an overview of Rothwell Innovations, so you understand exactly what we do?" For the next 2 hours, Elena received an intensive education on Alexander's company. Founded 15 years earlier with inheritance money and a vision to create pharmaceuticals that heal rather than merely treat, Rothwell Innovations had grown from a small research lab into a globally respected pharmaceutical company. Unlike the major pharma giants, they maintained a lean operation focused almost exclusively on developing treatments for rare conditions and diseases that larger companies often ignored due to limited profit potential. "We've developed 14 successful treatments so far," Alexander explained, showing her images of their research facilities. "But what makes us different is our approach to pricing and distribution." The company operated on what Alexander called a balanced model. Wealthy patients and those with premium insurance paid market rates, which then subsidized the same treatments for patients without means. In developing nations, Rothwell licensed their formulations to local manufacturers at nominal fees, ensuring treatments reached those who needed them regardless of geography or economic status. "It's not traditional charity," Alexander said, his passion evident in the intensity of his gaze. "It's sustainable humanitarianism. We still make profits. Quite substantial ones, actually, but not at the expense of access." Elena was genuinely impressed. "That's remarkable. How did you come up with this model?" A shadow crossed Alexander's features. "Personal experience," he said simply, then changed the subject. "Now, about your specific responsibilities." Elena made careful notes as Alexander outlined her duties, which were more extensive than she'd initially anticipated. Beyond traditional assistant tasks, she would serve as a liaison between Alexander and department heads, screen potential research partners, review preliminary data from clinical trials, and occasionally represent him at meetings he couldn't attend. "That sounds like more than an assistant," she observed. "More like a junior executive." Alexander smiled. "You're perceptive. The title is executive assistant, but in practice, you'll function as something closer to a chief of staff. I've found that artificial hierarchies impede both efficiency and innovation. I value capability over credentials." "But I don't have experience in pharmaceuticals or business," Elena reminded him, momentarily overwhelmed by the scope of what he was describing. "You don't need to be a scientist or an MBA to recognize patterns, identify important information, and communicate effectively," Alexander countered. "Besides, I suspect you're a quick study." His confidence in her abilities was simultaneously flattering and terrifying. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. Alexander answered it, admitting a hotel staff member wheeling a covered lunch service. "I took the liberty of ordering for us," he explained as the table was efficiently reset for a meal. "I hope you don't mind." The staff member departed, and Alexander lifted the silver covers to reveal an elegant lunch of grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a light salad. "I should have asked if you have any dietary restrictions," he added, suddenly looking concerned. "This is perfect," Elena assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I eat almost anything." They ate while continuing their discussion, moving on to the upcoming trip to New York. Alexander outlined the meetings scheduled, explaining the context and objectives for each one. Elena was surprised to learn they would be staying in his apartment rather than a hotel. "I maintain residences in cities where I frequently conduct business," he explained, noting her surprise. "It's more comfortable than hotels for extended stays and more secure for sensitive discussions. We'll be there for 5 days, then fly to San Francisco for the Medical Technology Conference." Elena nodded, making notes about the schedule. "And my accommodations in these locations?" "In New York, the apartment has a guest suite you'll use. In other locations, we'll typically stay at hotels with connecting rooms for efficiency. Seeing her expression, he added, with appropriate privacy, of course. There will always be a proper door between us that locks from your side. The reassurance was professionally delivered, but Elena couldn't help noticing the faint color that appeared high on Alexander's cheekbones. It was the first time she'd seen any crack in his polished composure, and somehow it made him more human, more approachable. "I wasn't concerned," she said truthfully. Despite the suddenness of their arrangement, Elena had never felt unsafe or uncomfortable in Alexander's presence. If anything, she felt unusually at ease with him, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few days. Alexander's eyes met hers, a moment of silent understanding passing between them before he cleared his throat and returned to business. "After lunch, I'd like to introduce you to our secure communication systems and database access. You'll need to be familiar with both before we leave." The afternoon passed quickly as Elena absorbed an overwhelming amount of information. Alexander proved to be a patient teacher, explaining complex procedures clearly and never showing frustration when she needed clarification. By late afternoon, her head was swimming with passwords, protocols, and pharmaceutical terminology. "I think that's enough for today," Alexander said finally, noting her fatigue. "You've done remarkably well. Most people take weeks to assimilate what you've managed in hours." "I feel like my brain is about to explode," Elena admitted with a small laugh. "Information overload is normal. It will settle in overnight." Alexander closed his laptop, his movements precise as always. "Why don't you head home and rest? Make sure everything is arranged for your mother, finish your packing. Our flight tomorrow is at 10 a.m., so we'll need to leave for the airport by 8. Elena nodded, gathering her belongings. As she slipped her notebook into her new bag, she hesitated. "Alexander, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. It's not what I expected when I offered to help you at the airport." His expression softened. Life rarely gives us what we expect, does it? Sometimes it gives us what we need instead. There was something in his tone, a hint of personal experience behind the philosophical observation, that made Elena wonder again about the man behind the polished exterior. "I suppose that's true?" she agreed, rising to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow morning then." Alexander walked her to the door. "One more thing," he said, just as she was about to step into the hallway. "You did well today, Elena. Very well. I believe my instincts about you were correct." The simple praise shouldn't have affected her so strongly, but Elena felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you. I'll try not to disappoint you." "I don't believe you will," he replied, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Until tomorrow." The drive home gave Elena time to process the day's information overload. Alexander Rothwell was clearly more than the wealthy businessman she'd initially taken him for. His company's ethical approach to pharmaceutical development suggested principles and values that aligned surprisingly well with her own. And while he maintained a certain reserve, there were moments when she glimpsed something deeper. A passion for his work, a genuine concern for others, a subtle vulnerability that humanized his otherwise perfect composure. At home, Elena found her mother engaged in an animated conversation with Camilla Rivera, the supervisor from the home health care agency. The two women looked up as Elena entered, both smiling widely. "Elena, come meet Camilla. She's been telling me all about the wonderful care I'll receive while you're traveling," Maria exclaimed, clearly delighted with the arrangements. Camilla stood, extending her hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, it's a pleasure. We've been finalizing the care schedule for your mother. I believe you'll find everything is well in hand." The next hour was spent reviewing care plans, emergency protocols, and introducing Elena to the two primary caregivers who would be supporting Maria. By the time they left, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her mother would be well cared for, perhaps better than when Elena was juggling her night shifts and caregiver duties. "They're wonderful," Maria declared once they were alone. "And did you see all the equipment they're bringing? A better wheelchair, the special bath chair, the exercise equipment for my therapy, all included in the service." Elena nodded, grateful for Alexander's thoroughness in arranging her mother's care. Another debt she was accruing to him, though he would undoubtedly dismiss it as a business necessity. "Are you all packed, Carino?" Maria asked, wheeling herself to the kitchen. "I made your favorite for dinner tonight. One last home-cooked meal before you join the jet set." Elena laughed, following her mother. "Hardly the jet set, Mama. I'll be working, not socializing with celebrities. Still, business-class flights, fancy hotels, designer clothes, quite a change from garbage bags and floor polish, no?" Maria's eyes twinkled as she began serving the chicken mole she'd prepared. "And all because you offered to help a handsome stranger." "It does seem unreal," Elena admitted, accepting the plate. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." "Not a dream," Maria said firmly. "An opportunity well deserved. You've sacrificed so much for me these past years. It's time something good happened for you." Elena smiled, touched by her mother's support. "I'm still worried about leaving you." "Pah!" Maria waved a dismissive hand. "I'll be fine. Better than fine with all this fancy new help. And you'll call often, yes?" "Every day," Elena promised. "Then go," Maria said simply. "Go see the world beyond this apartment and that airport. Go find out what Elena Rodriguez is capable of becoming." That night, as Elena finished packing her new luggage with her new clothes for her new life, she found herself filled with a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. Everything was happening so quickly, transforming her daily existence from routine drudgery into something entirely unknown. At the center of this transformation was Alexander Rothwell, a man who had appeared in her life like a character from a different story altogether, complex, enigmatic, and increasingly intriguing. As she set her alarm for an early start, Elena realized she was genuinely looking forward to seeing him again in the morning. The thought should have alarmed her, given their professional relationship, but instead it brought a small smile to her lips as she drifted into sleep. The sleek black town car glided through early morning traffic as Elena tried to appear nonchalant about the luxury surrounding her. From the butter-soft leather seats to the privacy partition to the discreet refreshment cabinet, everything screamed wealth and privilege, a world away from the noisy, crowded bus she usually took to the airport. Alexander sat beside her, reviewing documents on his tablet while occasionally dictating notes into his phone. He wore another impeccably tailored suit, this one a deep charcoal that seemed to emphasize the blue of his eyes. Elena had chosen a navy pantsuit from her new wardrobe, paired with a simple silk shell in a soft blush tone, professional but feminine. "Have you been to New York before?" Alexander asked, setting his tablet aside as they approached the airport. Elena shook her head. "No, I've hardly traveled at all, actually. A few trips to Mexico to visit family when I was younger, but that's it. Then I hope you'll have some time to experience the city beyond meeting rooms and my apartment," Alexander said with a smile. "New York has an energy unlike anywhere else." "I'd like that," Elena admitted, "though I'm not sure how much free time we'll have given the schedule." "I'll make sure you get at least one afternoon to yourself," Alexander promised. "Consider it part of your orientation." At the airport, Elena experienced another first, the VIP entrance that bypassed the usual security lines. A discreet sign marked "Premium Services" led them to a private screening area where they were processed quickly and efficiently, then escorted directly to the first-class lounge. Elena tried not to gawk at the opulent space with its chef-staffed buffet, private shower suites, and complimentary spa services. "Would you like anything?" Alexander asked as they settled into plush chairs by the window overlooking the tarmac. "Just coffee, thank you," Elena replied, still feeling slightly dazed by the rarefied environment. Alexander nodded to a passing attendant who returned moments later with a silver tray bearing a French press, fine china cups, and a selection of pastries. "I took the liberty of ordering some breakfast as well," Alexander explained. "The flight is only about 4 hours, but the morning meal on board is never quite substantial enough. As they sipped their coffee, Alexander briefed her on their first meeting scheduled for that afternoon, a discussion with research partners from Columbia University Medical Center about a promising new treatment for a rare neurological disorder. You mentioned yesterday that your approach to pharmaceuticals came from personal experience, Elena said carefully, seizing an opportunity to learn more about him. May I ask what you meant by that? Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. My younger sister had a rare genetic condition, he said finally. Calvert syndrome. Only a few dozen documented cases worldwide at the time. Elena stayed silent, sensing there was more to the story, and that Alexander needed space to tell it in his own way. She was brilliant, could solve complex mathematical equations in her head by age 8, taught herself 3 languages by 12. A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. But the disease was progressive. By 15, she was losing motor control. By 17, she needed full-time care. I'm so sorry, Elena said softly. The existing treatments were palliative at best and bankruptingly expensive. My family had resources, but I saw what happened to other families affected by rare diseases. They'd exhaust their savings, sell their homes, destroy their financial futures, all for treatments that merely slowed the inevitable. His jaw tightened. When I came into my inheritance, I decided there had to be a better way. Did you find a treatment for your sister? Elena asked. Alexander's expression clouded. Too late, he said simply. She died at 23, but her condition became the first research initiative at Rothwell Innovations. The treatment we developed can now halt the progression entirely if administered early enough. The pain in his voice was controlled but unmistakable. Elena fought the impulse to reach for his hand, maintaining the professional boundary between them despite her instinctive desire to offer comfort. That's why I was so affected by your offer at the airport, Alexander continued, meeting her eyes directly. The medication I needed, it's for a heart condition related to a virus I contracted while visiting research sites in Southeast Asia 3 years ago. Not immediately life-threatening, but without it, complications develop rapidly. Your willingness to help reminded me that human compassion exists beyond self-interest. I see too little of that in my world. Before Elena could respond, the lounge attendant approached to inform them their flight was ready for boarding. The moment of vulnerability passed, and Alexander was once again the composed businessman as they made their way to the gate. The first-class cabin was another revelation for Elena. Individual suites with seats that fully reclined into beds, personal entertainment systems, and attentive flight attendants who addressed Alexander by name, suggesting he was a frequent flyer on this route. Elena settled into her seat, trying not to appear too awestruck by the amenities surrounding her. First time in first class? Alexander asked with a knowing smile as he accepted a pre-flight champagne from the attendant. That obvious, huh? Elena replied, slightly embarrassed. Not at all. But there's a particular expression people get, a blend of delight and disbelief, that tends to give it away. His eyes crinkled warmly at the corners. Enjoy it. These small luxuries make frequent travel bearable. During the flight, they continued reviewing the upcoming meetings, with Alexander providing detailed background on each participant, their history with the company, and strategic objectives. Elena took careful notes, determined to prove herself worthy of his confidence in her abilities. You don't need to memorize everything, Alexander assured her, noticing her intensity. That's why we document. But understanding the personal dynamics is often as important as the technical details. Elena nodded, appreciating his guidance. People respond to feeling understood. Precisely. Alexander looked pleased by her understanding. Business is ultimately about relationships. The most brilliant innovation is worthless if you can't navigate the human factors involved in bringing it to market. As their working session concluded, Alexander suggested she rest for the remainder of the flight. Elena reclined her seat, intending to close her eyes briefly, but the comfortable environment and her early start conspired against her. She fell into a deep sleep, waking only as the captain announced their final approach to JFK. Embarrassed, Elena quickly adjusted her seat and checked her appearance. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to fall asleep on the job." Alexander dismissed her concern with a wave. "Travel rest isn't leisure, it's necessity. You'll learn to sleep whenever the opportunity presents itself. It's the only way to manage the pace." His understanding eased her discomfort, and Elena felt a rush of gratitude for his patience with her inexperience. Every new setting, every unfamiliar protocol was a potential misstep, yet Alexander's guidance remained calm and non-judgmental. New York greeted them with brilliant autumn sunshine and crisp air. Another town car waited on the tarmac. A perk of first-class travel, Elena was learning, whisking them directly from plane to vehicle without the usual airport formalities. "We'll go straight to the apartment," Alexander said as they settled in. "There's time to freshen up before our meeting at Columbia." The drive into Manhattan provided Elena her first glimpse of the iconic skyline, the glass and steel towers gleaming in the midday sun. Alexander pointed out landmarks as they passed, his evident fondness for the city adding a personal touch to the impromptu tour. Alexander's New York residence proved to be a penthouse apartment in a sleek high-rise overlooking Central Park. The doorman greeted him by name, and the private elevator whisked them directly to the top floor. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into a space that perfectly embodied Alexander himself. Elegant without ostentation, meticulously ordered and designed with purpose rather than mere show. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the park and city beyond. The furnishings were contemporary but comfortable in a palette of blues, grays, and warm neutrals. Art adorned the walls, not the showy status pieces Elena might have expected, but thoughtfully selected works that rewarded closer inspection. "Your suite is this way," Alexander said, leading her down a hallway. He opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with its own sitting area and ensuite bathroom. Like the rest of the apartment, it was beautifully appointed but not extravagant. "Make yourself comfortable. We'll leave for Columbia in about an hour." Left alone, Elena explored her temporary accommodations with amazement. The bathroom featured a rainfall shower, deep soaking tub, and an array of luxury toiletries. A walk-in closet awaited her clothes, complete with a steamer to remove any travel wrinkles. On the bedside table, she found a welcome note with the Wi-Fi password, a guide to the apartment's amenities, and a fully charged spare phone charger. The thoughtfulness of these preparations touched her. Alexander had anticipated her needs before she even knew to articulate them, making her feel not like an employee but an honored guest. It was a subtle distinction, but one that spoke volumes about his character. Elena quickly freshened up and changed into one of the dresses Sophie had selected for business meetings, a navy sheath with architectural seaming that Elena had initially thought too sophisticated for her, but now appreciated for its elegant simplicity. She was applying a touch of lipstick when a soft knock at her door announced Alexander's return. "Ready?" he asked when she opened the door, his gaze briefly taking in her appearance with evident approval. "As I'll ever be," Elena replied, gathering her portfolio and the tablet Alexander had provided for note-taking. In the elevator, Alexander briefed her on last-minute details about their meeting partners. "Dr. Patel can be somewhat abrupt, but it's efficiency rather than rudeness. Doctor." Lowell tends to digress into theoretical applications. Interesting, but not always relevant to our immediate objectives. Your role today is primarily observation, though feel free to ask clarifying questions if needed. The research facility at Columbia was a stark contrast to Alexander's refined apartment, all fluorescent lighting, utilitarian furniture, and the distinctive scent of a working laboratory. Dr. Patel, a petite woman with intelligent eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, greeted Alexander with clear respect before turning a curious gaze on Elena. "This is Elena Rodriguez, my new chief of staff." Alexander introduced her, the slight promotion from executive assistant not lost on Elena. She'll be working closely with me on the Neurogen project moving forward. Excellent, Dr. Patel replied, shaking Elena's hand firmly. Fresh eyes are always valuable. Come, the team is waiting in the conference room. The meeting proved more engaging than Elena had anticipated. The scientists presented their research findings with clarity and passion, and Alexander's questions revealed a deep technical understanding that surprised her. This wasn't a businessman making investment decisions based solely on profit potential. Alexander clearly grasped the science behind the treatment they were developing. As the discussion progressed to funding allocations for the next research phase, Elena noticed a discrepancy in the budget projections. She hesitated, remembering Alexander's instruction that her role was primarily observation, but the error was significant enough to potentially impact the entire project timeline. During a brief pause while Dr. Lowell pulled up additional data, Elena leaned toward Alexander. There's an inconsistency in the Phase 2 funding allocation, she whispered, indicating the relevant section in the documents. They've budgeted for standard trial protocols, but this treatment will require enhanced monitoring per FDA guidelines for neurological applications. The difference is substantial. Alexander studied the section she indicated, his expression sharpening. When Dr. Lowell resumed his presentation, Alexander raised the issue, credit unmentioned, but Elena's observation clear in his articulation of the concern. The scientists quickly recognized the oversight, Dr. Patel actually looking relieved that it had been caught early rather than discovered mid-trial. This would have caused significant delays, she acknowledged. We'll need to revise the entire budget structure. By the meeting's end, a new framework had been established that would keep the project on track despite the increased monitoring requirements. As they left the facility, Elena noticed Alexander watching her with a speculative expression. That was an excellent catch, he said finally as they settled back into the town car. How did you identify the discrepancy? Elena explained that she'd noticed similar FDA requirements mentioned in the company materials he'd had her review the previous day. The protocols seemed very specific about neurological treatments requiring enhanced monitoring, and the budget didn't reflect those additional costs. Alexander nodded slowly, something like satisfaction in his expression. Most people wouldn't have connected those separate pieces of information, especially not on their first day engaging with the material. I just got lucky, Elena demurred, though secretly pleased by his approval. No, Alexander said firmly. That wasn't luck. That was precisely the kind of insight I hoped you'd bring to this role. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. I think this arrangement is going to work very well indeed. The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through Elena's chest that had nothing to do with professional pride. As the car continued through the bustling New York streets, she found herself hoping he was right, in more ways than she was ready to admit, even to herself. The following days in New York fell into a rhythm that simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted Elena. Each morning began with coffee in Alexander's kitchen, going over the day's schedule while the early sunlight streamed through the wall of windows. Alexander was an early riser, always impeccably dressed and fully alert by 7, regardless of how late they'd worked the previous evening. Elena quickly learned that Alexander's seemingly inexhaustible energy stemmed from disciplined habits, daily exercise before dawn, careful attention to nutrition, and an almost religious adherence to getting at least 6 hours of sleep, no matter the demands on his time. She found herself naturally adapting to his patterns, setting her alarm earlier each day to ensure she was prepared when he emerged from his morning workout. Their days were filled with meetings across the city, research partners, potential investors, regulatory consultants, each requiring different materials, different approaches, and different aspects of Alexander's considerable expertise. Elena observed him closely, absorbing his strategies for handling various personalities and situations. He was unfailingly polite but never obsequious, commanding respect without demanding it. By their third evening in New York, Elena felt as though she'd received a crash course in both pharmaceutical business operations and executive presence. She was adapting quickly, learning to anticipate Alexander's needs and provide information before he asked for it. The satisfaction of his approving nods when she handed him precisely the document he'd been about to request made the steep learning curve worthwhile. "You're a natural at this," Alexander commented as they returned to the apartment after a particularly productive meeting with investment partners. "Most people take months to develop the instincts you're showing after days." "I'm just trying to keep up," Elena admitted, slipping off her heels with a small sigh of relief once they were inside. Despite Sophie's assurances about the comfort of her new shoes, Elena's feet were still adjusting to spending entire days in professional footwear. Alexander noticed her grimace. "Not used to heels all day? Is it that obvious? Only because I've witnessed the same expression on nearly every woman in my executive team at some point," he replied with a wry smile. "The sacrifices made for professional appearance are rarely equitably distributed between genders." His awareness surprised her. Most men she'd known seemed oblivious to such disparities. Before she could respond, Alexander glanced at his watch. "It's earlier than I expected. Have you had any chance to see the city?" Elena shook her head. "Not beyond the view from car windows between meetings." "That won't do." Alexander made a decisive gesture. "Change into something comfortable. I can give you at least an abbreviated tour before we need to prepare for tonight's gala." The reminder of the evening event sent a flutter of anxiety through Elena. The Neurogen Foundation Gala was the most formal event on their New York itinerary. A black-tie fundraiser bringing together researchers, donors, and families affected by neurological disorders. Even with her new midnight blue gown hanging ready in her closet, Elena felt woefully unprepared for such a high-profile social event. "Are you sure we have time?" she asked, thinking of the preparation she'd planned for the gala. "Positive. The change of scenery will do us both good." Alexander was already loosening his tie, a rare concession to informality. 15 minutes? 30 minutes later, they were strolling through Central Park, both dressed in casual attire. Elena in jeans and a light sweater, Alexander in dark slacks and a cashmere pullover that softened his usual business-like appearance. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over the autumn foliage and the park buzzed with New Yorkers enjoying the pleasant weather. "I try to walk here whenever I'm in the city," Alexander said as they followed a tree-lined path. "It helps clear my head." "It's beautiful," Elena agreed, watching a group of children sailing toy boats on the conservatory water. "I can see why you keep an apartment here, even though your company headquarters is elsewhere." "New York has always been a second home to me. My family had an apartment here when I was growing up, not far from here, actually." Alexander's pace slowed slightly. "After my sister's diagnosis, we came often for her treatments." Elena sensed an opening to learn more about the man behind the polished exterior. "What was she like?" "Your sister?" A genuine smile softened Alexander's features. "Cassandra was remarkable. Brilliant, yes, but also mischievous. She could solve complex equations that baffled her tutors, then use that same intelligence to execute elaborate pranks." He chuckled at some private memory. "She once reprogrammed our father's computerized home office system to play cartoon theme songs whenever he tried to make a business call. It took the IT team days to figure out how she'd done it." Elena laughed, imagining a younger, less controlled Alexander with a spirited sister. "She sounds wonderful." She was. His expression grew contemplative. Even when the disease began affecting her mobility, her mind remained sharp. She designed the initial algorithm we still use for identifying potential treatment compounds, created it from her hospital bed during her final months. "That's incredible," Elena said softly. Alexander nodded, his eyes distant. "I promised her our work would continue, that other families wouldn't have to go through what ours did, not just the loss but the helplessness of knowing treatments could exist but aren't being developed because the patient population is too small to be profitable." They walked in companionable silence for a while. Elena absorbing this new dimension of Alexander's motivation. His wealth and success had clearly been channeled into fulfilling a deeply personal mission, a fact that only increased her respect for him. As they rounded a bend in the path, Alexander pointed out landmarks: the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the distance, the Bethesda fountain where tourists gathered for photographs, the boathouse where he mentioned they might have lunch another day. For these brief hours, the professional boundaries between them seemed to soften, allowing a more natural connection to emerge. "Tell me about your father," Alexander said as they paused to watch a street performer juggling flaming torches. "You mentioned he died when you were young." Elena nodded, surprised by the personal question but not uncomfortable with it. "He was a construction foreman. Hard-working, honest, always the first to arrive and last to leave. He taught me that integrity isn't something you practice when it's convenient. It's a way of life." "A wise man," Alexander observed. "He was." Elena smiled at the memories. He had an 8th-grade education but read voraciously: history, science, philosophy. He believed learning never stopped, regardless of formal schooling. "That explains where you get it from?" Alexander said, his tone warm with what sounded like admiration. "Get what?" "Your intelligence, your work ethic, your moral compass?" He spoke matter-of-factly, as if stating obvious truths rather than offering compliments. Elena felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "Thank you. That means a lot." They continued walking, their conversation flowing easily between personal reminiscences and observations about the park, the city, the people around them. Elena realized that despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and experiences, she felt completely at ease with Alexander in a way she rarely did with others. There was no need to filter her thoughts or present a polished version of herself. He seemed genuinely interested in her authentic perspective. All too soon, Alexander glanced at his watch and announced it was time to return to the apartment to prepare for the evening's event. As they made their way back, Elena felt a curious reluctance to end this interlude of casual companionship. Back at the apartment, they parted to their respective suites to prepare for the gala. Elena spent longer than usual on her appearance, carefully applying her makeup and styling her hair into an elegant updo that Sophie had taught her would complement the midnight blue gown. The dress itself was a marvel of understated elegance, fitted through the bodice with a softly flowing skirt, the deep blue fabric catching the light as she moved. When she finally emerged into the living room, Elena felt a momentary flash of insecurity. Would she pass muster in this rarefied world of wealth and privilege? Her concerns evaporated at the expression on Alexander's face when he turned from the window to greet her. For a brief moment, he simply stared, his customary composure replaced by undisguised appreciation. "Elena," he said finally, his voice lower than usual, "you look absolutely stunning." The sincerity in his tone sent warmth coursing through her. "Thank you," she replied, taking in his appearance with equal admiration. Alexander in a tuxedo was a sight to behold, the formal attire emphasizing his broad shoulders and athletic build, the stark black and white a perfect backdrop for his vivid blue eyes. "The car is waiting," he said, offering his arm in a gesture that felt both courteous and protective. "Ready for your first gala?" The Neurogen Foundation had taken over the grand ballroom of one of New York's most prestigious hotels. As they entered, Elena was momentarily overwhelmed by the opulence: crystal chandeliers, enormous floral arrangements, a string quartet playing softly in one corner, and hundreds of guests in formal attire mingling over champagne. "Just stay close," Alexander murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. These events follow predictable patterns: cocktails, dinner, speeches, dancing, more cocktails. "We need to connect with several key people before dinner, then you're free to enjoy yourself." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions as Alexander navigated the room with practiced ease. Elena observed how he tailored each interaction to the individual, discussing technical details with researchers, expressing genuine empathy with families affected by neurological disorders, and engaging donors with compelling narratives about the Foundation's impact. Throughout it all, Alexander kept Elena seamlessly integrated into the conversations, introducing her as "my colleague" rather than his assistant, and frequently deferring to her on matters they'd discussed in preparation. His implicit trust in her professional capabilities gave Elena confidence to engage even with intimidatingly accomplished individuals. During dinner, they were seated at a table with a renowned neurologist, a philanthropy director from a major bank, and several other influential figures. The conversation ranged from the latest research breakthroughs to arts patronage to climate policy. Elena found herself contributing more than she'd expected, drawing on knowledge gleaned from years of reading during long night shifts at the airport. "Your perspective is refreshing, Ms. Rodriguez," commented Dr. Harriet Chen, the neurologist, after Elena made a point about patient advocacy and clinical trial design. "Too often these discussions become siloed in technical expertise without considering the lived experiences of patients and families." "Thank you," Elena replied, warmed by the validation. "My mother's experience with MS has taught me how critical that perspective can be." Alexander, engaged in conversation on her other side, briefly touched her hand under the table, a small gesture of support and approval that shouldn't have affected her as strongly as it did. The simple contact sent awareness shimmering through her, momentarily distracting her from Dr. Chen's follow-up question. After dinner came speeches, with Alexander among the keynote speakers. Elena watched with undisguised admiration as he addressed the crowd, speaking without notes about the Foundation's mission and recent achievements. There was a passion and authenticity to his delivery that clearly resonated with the audience. When he shared a brief anecdote about Cassandra's brilliant mind and indomitable spirit, Elena noticed many attendees discreetly wiping away tears. As the formal program concluded and the dance floor opened, Alexander returned to their table, accepting congratulations on his speech with gracious humility. "That was wonderful," Elena told him when they had a moment alone. "You really moved people." "Thank you," he replied, his expression softening in a way she was beginning to recognize as genuine emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. Cassandra would have hated all the formality but loved seeing the research progress. The string quartet had been replaced by a small orchestra, and couples were beginning to fill the dance floor. Alexander glanced at the dancers, then back at Elena, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Elena hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd like that," she said truthfully. "Though I should warn you, I haven't done much formal dancing." Alexander's smile was reassuring as he led her to the floor. "Just follow my lead." His hand settled at her waist, firm but gentle, as he guided her into a simple waltz. Elena found it surprisingly easy to follow his movements, their bodies somehow naturally synchronizing to the music's rhythm. As they circled the floor, she gradually relaxed into the dance, enjoying the novel sensation of being led by someone so confident and sure. "You're a natural," Alexander murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he drew her slightly closer to avoid another couple. "I have a good partner," Elena replied, looking up to find his eyes intent on her face, an expression in their blue depths that made her heart beat faster for reasons entirely unrelated to the dance. For a moment, the crowded ballroom seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them in a private world created by music and movement. Something was shifting between them, something that transcended their professional relationship and ventured into territory Elena hadn't allowed herself to consider. Then the music ended, breaking the spell. Alexander's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, his professional demeanor reasserting itself. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, though his eyes still held that unreadable warmth. "Would you like some air? The terrace is usually quieter than the ballroom." Elena nodded, suddenly aware of how warm the room had become. Or perhaps it was simply her reaction to being held in Alexander's arms, even in the conventional embrace of a waltz. As he guided her toward the terrace doors, Elena wondered if she was imagining the subtle shift in their dynamic, or if Alexander was feeling it too, this gradual transformation of professional regard into something more complex and potentially dangerous for them both. The terrace overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline, the autumn night cool, but not uncomfortable. A few other guests lingered at the far end, their quiet conversations creating a gentle backdrop to the muted orchestra music filtering from inside. Elena moved to the stone balustrade, breathing in the crisp air and trying to calm her racing thoughts. Alexander joined her, maintaining a respectful distance as they both gazed out at the city lights. For several moments they stood in silence, the shared quiet somehow more intimate than conversation would have been. "I've always thought New York is at its most beautiful at night," Alexander said finally. "All the rough edges hidden, just light and possibility." Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "It's like seeing the essence rather than the details." He turned to look at her, a curious expression crossing his features. "You have a way of articulating things that get straight to the heart of the matter." "Is that a good thing?" "It's a rare thing," Alexander replied. "Most people in my world are masters of saying much while revealing little. Your directness is refreshing." Elena smiled, warmed by the compliment. "I don't know how to be any other way. My father used to say that honesty saves time." "A pragmatic approach," Alexander agreed, his eyes returning to the skyline. "Though in business, sometimes a more circuitous route is necessary." "Is that true in personal matters as well?" The question slipped out before Elena could reconsider its implications. Alexander went very still, though his expression remained composed. "That depends entirely on the personal matters in question," he said carefully. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Elena knew she was approaching a boundary that, once crossed, would fundamentally change their relationship. The professional part of her mind warned caution, but another part, one that had been gradually awakening during their time together, urged her forward. Before she could respond, Alexander's phone vibrated. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. "I apologize, but I need to take this. It's the Tokyo office." He moved a few steps away, his voice dropping into the efficient tone he used for business matters. The interruption broke the tension of the moment, allowing Elena's rational mind to reassert control. What was she thinking? Alexander was her employer, not a potential romantic partner. The fact that she found him attractive, admirable, and increasingly essential to her daily happiness was irrelevant. Professional boundaries existed for good reasons. Alexander returned, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, but we need to leave. There's a situation developing with the Kyoto clinical trial that requires immediate attention." All personal considerations were immediately set aside as Elena shifted into work mode. "What do you need me to do?" "We'll need to set up a video conference as soon as we return to the apartment. Can you contact Dr. Miyazaki and the regulatory team while I make our excuses here?" "Of course." They moved with efficient coordination, Alexander smoothly explaining their early departure to their hosts, while Elena stepped aside to begin making calls. Within 15 minutes, they were in the town car heading back to the apartment, both focused entirely on the emerging crisis. At the apartment, they moved with the synchronicity of a much longer partnership. Elena set up the video conference in Alexander's home office while he reviewed the latest data reports sent from Tokyo. When the call connected, they presented a united front to the concerned Japanese research team, with Alexander addressing the scientific concerns while Elena took notes and occasionally interjected with pertinent regulatory information she'd gathered during her preparatory reading. 3 hours later, the immediate crisis had been contained. A potential adverse reaction in one of the trial participants had raised alarm, but further investigation revealed it was unrelated to the study medication. Still, protocols needed to be adjusted, documentation updated, and regulatory authorities notified. "That was extremely well handled," Alexander said as the last call ended, running a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of fatigue that humanized him. "Your input on the regulatory reporting requirements was exactly what we needed." Elena, who had kicked off her heels hours ago and was perched on the edge of Alexander's desk, smiled tiredly. "Just applying what I've been reading. I'm glad it was useful. More than useful. Essential." Alexander leaned back in his chair, loosening his bow tie with one fluid motion. "You have a remarkable ability to absorb and apply new information. Most people with decades in the industry don't grasp regulatory nuances as quickly as you have in days." "I've always been a fast learner," Elena said, oddly embarrassed by his praise, "and I've had an excellent teacher." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the intimacy they'd approached on the terrace returned, intensified by the shared experience of managing the crisis together. Elena was suddenly acutely aware of how they must appear. She perched on his desk, still in her evening gown, he with bow tie undone and jacket discarded, the late hour and fading adrenaline creating a cocoon of shared accomplishment and growing personal connection. Alexander seemed to realize it too. He stood abruptly, putting necessary distance between them. "It's late. You should get some rest. We still have the investor meeting in the morning, though I think we can push it back an hour." "Of course," Elena agreed, slipping off the desk and retrieving her shoes. "I'll adjust the schedule and let them know." "Thank you." Alexander's voice was controlled, professional, but his eyes followed her movements with an intensity that suggested his thoughts were not entirely business-focused. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Alexander." In her suite, Elena carefully hung up the midnight blue gown, her mind replaying the evening's events. The dance, the moment on the terrace, the crisis management that had revealed how effectively they worked together. Each interaction seemed to be drawing them closer, blurring the clearly defined roles they'd established. As she prepared for bed, Elena admitted to herself what she'd been avoiding acknowledging. She was developing feelings for Alexander that went far beyond professional admiration or friendly affection. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Alexander Rothwell was not just her employer, but a man from a completely different world. Sophisticated, wealthy, powerful. What could possibly come of such feelings except complication and eventual heartache? Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of dancing with Alexander in that midnight blue gown, his arms holding her just a little too close to be merely professional. The remaining days in New York passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and site visits to research facilities. If Alexander was affected by the almost moment on the terrace, he showed no sign of it, maintaining impeccable professional boundaries while remaining warmly collegial. Elena followed his lead, focusing on the work and trying to ignore the flutter in her chest whenever he stood close or their hands accidentally brushed while exchanging documents. On their final evening in New York, Alexander suggested dining in rather than going out. "We have an early flight to San Francisco, and I think we could both use a quieter evening," he explained as he placed the order with his regular delivery service. They ate on the terrace, the mild evening perfect for outdoor dining. The conversation remained safely professional for most of the meal, discussing the successful outcomes of their New York meetings and the objectives for San Francisco. As they finished their wine, however, Alexander steered into more personal territory. "You've adjusted remarkably well to this role," he observed. "How are you feeling about it so far?" Elena considered the question honestly. "It's been challenging, but incredibly rewarding. I've learned more in these few days than in months at my previous job." "And the travel? Being away from your mother?" "The agency you recommended has been wonderful. We video chat daily, and she seems genuinely happy with the care she's receiving." Elena smiled, recalling her mother's enthusiasm during their last call. "In fact, I think she's enjoying the extra attention. Camilla has introduced her to watercolor painting, something she's always wanted to try." Alexander nodded, pleased. "I'm glad to hear it. And what about you? Beyond the professional aspects, are you finding any personal satisfaction in this new arrangement? The question ventured closer to the territory they'd been carefully avoiding. Elena took a sip of her wine before answering. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." Alexander's eyes met hers, and something in his gaze suggested he understood the layers behind her response. "Good," he said softly. "So am I." The moment hung between them, pregnant with possibility, before Alexander smoothly shifted the conversation back to their upcoming trip. Elena followed his lead, but the brief exchange left her wondering if she'd imagined the significance in his tone, the warmth in his eyes. The flight to San Francisco the next morning provided no opportunity for personal conversation. Alexander spent most of the journey on his laptop, preparing for their first meeting with a biotech startup developing innovative delivery methods for neurological medications. Elena used the time to review the detailed profiles of the key executives they would be meeting, committing their backgrounds and priorities to memory. San Francisco greeted them with its characteristic fog and a bracing chill that made Elena grateful for the cashmere wrap Sophie had insisted she include in her travel wardrobe. Alexander's residence there proved to be another penthouse, this one in a renovated historic building with spectacular views of the Bay Bridge. The decor was warmer than the New York apartment, with more wood and earth tones, yet it maintained the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized all of Alexander's spaces. "This one feels more personal somehow," Elena observed as Alexander gave her a brief tour before they departed for their first meeting. "It is," he admitted. "I spend more time here than in New York. The San Francisco office handles most of our innovative research partnerships, so I'm here at least once a month." Unlike New York, where they had moved primarily between Alexander's apartment and meeting locations, San Francisco offered more glimpses into Alexander's personal life. Their first evening included dinner at a small Italian restaurant where the owner greeted Alexander with the warmth of an old friend, ushering them to his usual table in a quiet corner and bringing a bottle of wine without being asked. "Lorenzo's family has owned this place for 3 generations," Alexander explained, as the owner departed after an animated conversation in rapid Italian. "I found it during my second year of medical school, when I was surviving primarily on coffee and determination." Elena looked up in surprise. "Medical school? I didn't know you were a doctor." "I completed the MD-PhD program at UCSF," Alexander said, breaking a piece of crusty bread. "The plan was to follow a traditional research path until Cassandra's diagnosis changed everything. I finished the degrees but chose to focus on developing treatments rather than practicing medicine." This new dimension to Alexander's background explained his deep technical understanding of the research they'd been reviewing. Elena found herself yet again impressed by the layers beneath his polished exterior, the depth of knowledge, experience, and personal history that informed his current mission. "You continue to surprise me," she said honestly. Alexander's eyes warmed. "Is that a good thing?" "It is," Elena replied, echoing his response from the terrace in New York. "Definitely a good thing." Their evening continued pleasantly, the conversation flowing easily between professional topics and more personal observations. By the time they returned to the apartment, Elena felt a growing certainty that whatever was developing between them was not one-sided. The way Alexander looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, the small courtesies that went beyond professional consideration, the increasing frequency with which he sought her opinion on matters outside her official duties, all suggested an interest that mirrored her own. Yet he maintained a careful distance, never crossing the line from warmth into explicit personal interest. Elena respected the restraint, understanding the complexity of their professional relationship, even as she found herself wondering what might happen if one of them were brave enough to acknowledge the unspoken attraction. The opportunity came unexpectedly on their 3rd day in San Francisco. They had attended a morning presentation at a research facility south of the city, and Alexander surprised her by suggesting they take the afternoon off. "The advantages of being the boss," he said with a rare, playful smile. "I've seen enough technical presentations this week to last a month. I thought we might drive down the coast instead. There's a spot I'd like to show you." They took Alexander's car, a sleek but understated luxury sedan kept at his San Francisco residence, heading south on Highway 1. The fog had lifted, revealing a brilliant blue sky and the breathtaking coastline that made this drive famous. Elena had never seen the Pacific before, and she found herself entranced by the rugged beauty of the cliffs and beaches. Alexander drove with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about previous visits to the area. After about an hour, he turned onto a nearly hidden side road that wound down toward the ocean. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, curious about this unplanned excursion. "Somewhere special," Alexander replied, a hint of anticipation in his voice. "Somewhere I haven't shared with many people." The road ended at a small parking area above a secluded cove. Alexander led her down a winding path to a pristine beach enclosed by towering cliffs. The only sounds were the crash of waves and the occasional cry of seagulls. No other visitors, no signs of civilization besides the path they'd taken. "It's beautiful," Elena breathed, taking in the untouched perfection of the spot. "I found it by accident years ago," Alexander said, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "I come here whenever I need perspective. Something about the timelessness of it, the way it makes human concerns seem simultaneously significant and inconsequential." They walked along the water's edge, occasionally stopping to examine interesting shells or watch the waves crash against offshore rocks. Alexander seemed different here, more relaxed, less guarded, as if the location itself granted him permission to set aside his carefully maintained control. They found a comfortable spot on sun-warmed rocks and sat side by side, looking out at the endless blue of the Pacific. For a long while, they simply existed in companionable silence, the beauty of the location requiring no commentary. "Thank you for bringing me here," Elena said finally, "for sharing this with me." Alexander turned to look at her, his expression unusually open. "I wanted to," he said simply. It felt important somehow. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, the professional barriers that had defined their relationship temporarily suspended in this private paradise. Elena felt her heart quicken as Alexander's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Elena," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I find myself in an unexpected situation." "What situation is that?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "I hired you as my assistant, and you've become absolutely essential in that role. But I find myself—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Increasingly aware of you in ways that extend beyond our professional relationship." The honest admission hung between them, finally giving voice to what had been building since that first breakfast in the airport restaurant. Elena felt simultaneously terrified and elated, knowing that her response would irrevocably alter whatever came next. "I've been feeling the same way," she admitted softly, "but I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to acknowledge it." Alexander's expression softened with evident relief. "Appropriate or not, I find I can no longer ignore it. The question now is what we do about it." The question hung between them, waves crashing rhythmically against the shore as they faced the crossroads their relationship had reached. Elena looked into Alexander's eyes and saw the same mixture of hope and uncertainty she felt herself. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "The practical part of me says we should maintain professional boundaries. I've only been working for you for 2 weeks. 2 weeks that feel like much longer," Alexander observed. "But your practical concerns are valid. There are power dynamics to consider." Elena appreciated his candor. "Exactly. You're my employer. My entire financial stability now depends on this position, which complicates things considerably." Alexander turned slightly, facing her more directly. "I would never want you to feel pressured in any way. Your professional role is secure regardless of anything else between us." The sincerity in his voice reassured her. This wasn't a powerful man casually pursuing an employee. This was Alexander, thoughtful, principled, and genuinely concerned with her well-being. "Perhaps we should take things slowly," Elena suggested. "Get to know each other better outside work contexts before making any decisions." Alexander nodded, relief softening his features. "I'd like that. And I want to be clear. I value your professional contributions immensely. That won't change no matter where this leads." The tension eased, replaced by a gentle anticipation. They spent another hour at the beach, their conversation lighter now that the unspoken had been acknowledged. When they finally returned to the car, something had shifted between them. A new openness, a permission to see each other as more than colleagues without immediately acting on that awareness. The remainder of their San Francisco trip balanced professional responsibilities with carefully calibrated personal moments. Dinners at Alexander's favorite local restaurants, morning walks along the Embarcadero, an impromptu visit to a small art gallery featuring works by a painter Alexander had supported early in her career. Each shared experience revealed new facets of the man behind the polished executive exterior, and Elena found herself increasingly drawn to the complexity beneath the surface. By the time they returned to Elena's home city 2 weeks later, having completed the entire circuit of business meetings and conferences, they had established a rhythm that honored both their professional relationship and their growing personal connection. During business hours, they maintained appropriate boundaries, but evenings often found them sharing meals and conversations that ventured far beyond work topics. Alexander had proven true to his word. Her position remained secure, her professional contributions valued independently of their personal relationship. If anything, he held her to higher standards now, pushing her to develop her skills and confidence in business settings while providing the guidance she needed to succeed. Elena's life had transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined that early morning in the airport terminal. The exhausted night shift cleaner had become a poised professional woman, managing complex schedules, contributing meaningfully to important business decisions, and earning the respect of executives and researchers who would never have given her a second glance in her previous role. Most significantly, she was no longer merely surviving, but truly living, engaged with her work, expanding her horizons and allowing herself to imagine a future beyond the constraints of financial precarity and caregiver exhaustion. Her mother had noticed the change immediately upon Elena's return. "You stand differently," Maria observed the evening of Elena's homecoming. "Taller, more sure of yourself." "I feel different," Elena admitted. "Like I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed." Maria's eyes twinkled knowingly. "And this has nothing to do with your handsome employer?" "It's not just about Alexander," Elena protested, though his name brought an involuntary smile to her lips. "It's about discovering I'm capable of more than I believed." "But he saw that capability first, no?" Maria persisted. "When no one else did." Elena couldn't argue with that truth. Alexander had recognized something in her during that brief airport encounter that she hadn't fully seen in herself. His belief in her abilities had created the space for her to grow into them. The following morning, Elena met Alexander at his hotel to prepare for a meeting with local research partners. As they reviewed presentation materials together, she noticed him watching her with an expression that had become increasingly familiar, a mixture of professional appreciation and personal affection that always made her heart beat a little faster. "You've prepared exceptionally well for this meeting," he commented, reviewing her detailed notes on the research protocol they would be discussing. "Dr. Patel specifically mentioned how impressed she was with your analysis of the Phase 2 findings." "I'm learning from the best," Elena replied with a smile. Alexander set aside the documents and leaned back in his chair. "In fact, you've mastered most aspects of this position in record time. I've been thinking about your role going forward." Elena felt a momentary flicker of anxiety. "Oh? I believe you're ready for greater responsibility," he continued. "The executive assistant title no longer reflects the scope of your contributions." "What did you have in mind?" Elena asked, simultaneously flattered and nervous about what changes might be coming. "I'd like to create a new position for you, Director of Special Projects. You'd work directly with research teams to identify promising treatments that align with our mission, particularly for underserved patient populations. The role would involve more independent decision-making but still report directly to me." Elena blinked, stunned by the proposal. "That sounds like a significant promotion." "It is," Alexander agreed. "With a corresponding increase in compensation, of course. The base salary would be $180,000 annually, plus performance bonuses and equity options." The figure nearly took Elena's breath away. It represented financial security beyond anything she'd ever imagined, enough to ensure her mother received the best possible care for years to come, to pay off accumulated medical debts, perhaps even to buy a proper home with accommodations for Maria's condition. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll consider it," Alexander replied. "The position would still involve travel, but you'd have more flexibility to set your own schedule. And," he added with a hint of hesitation, "it would change the nature of our professional relationship. We would be colleagues rather than employer and employee." The implication was clear. A more equal professional footing would remove one of the primary complications in their personal relationship. Elena felt a flutter of hope mixed with lingering caution. "I'll need time to think about it," she said carefully. Alexander nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. Take all the time you need. This isn't a decision to rush." The meeting proceeded as planned, but Elena found her thoughts continually returning to Alexander's offer and its implications. By the time they returned to the hotel late that afternoon, she had reached a decision. "I'd like to accept the new position," she told him as they stepped into the elevator. "But I have one condition." Alexander raised an eyebrow, curiosity evident in his expression. "What condition is that?" "That we wait 3 months before exploring anything beyond a professional relationship," Elena said firmly. "I need to establish myself in this new role, prove to myself and everyone else that I've earned it based on merit, not other considerations." The elevator stopped at Alexander's floor, and they stepped out into the quiet hallway. "That's a reasonable and prudent approach," he acknowledged, his eyes warm with understanding. "I respect your thinking on this." "Thank you," Elena said, relieved by his response. "It's important to me that my professional success stands on its own, separate from whatever might develop between us personally." Alexander nodded, then reached for her hand, the touch sending familiar warmth through her despite its propriety. 3 months, then. I believe you'll excel in this role, Elena. Not because of any personal feelings I might have, but because I've watched you rise to every challenge with intelligence and determination." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. This was the essence of what had drawn her to Alexander beyond his external advantages. His ability to see her clearly and value her for exactly who she was. 3 months passed quickly, filled with the challenges and rewards of Elena's new position. She threw herself into the role with characteristic dedication, working closely with research teams to identify promising treatments for rare conditions, especially those affecting pediatric patients. Alexander provided guidance when needed, but increasingly gave her room to make independent decisions, his confidence in her abilities evident in the responsibilities he entrusted to her. Their professional relationship evolved into a true partnership of complementary strengths. Elena's natural empathy and insight into patient needs balanced Alexander's scientific expertise and business acumen, creating a dynamic that others in the company began to notice and respect. Throughout this professional evolution, they maintained the boundaries Elena had requested, limiting their interactions outside work to group settings with colleagues or brief professional meals when traveling. The mutual attraction remained, sometimes visible in lingering glances or the way they instinctively oriented toward each other in crowded rooms, but neither acted on it as the 3-month mark approached. On the exact day that marked 3 months since her promotion, Elena returned to her apartment after a successful presentation to the board of directors to find an elegantly simple bouquet of white roses on her doorstep. The card read only, "Dinner tonight? 8 p.m. at the Meridian." Her heart quickened as she read the message. The Meridian was the city's most exclusive restaurant, a place she would never have dreamed of entering during her days as an airport cleaner. Now she stepped into her apartment with a confidence born of genuine achievement, knowing she had earned her place in such settings through her own merit and hard work. Elena chose her outfit with care, a simple but elegant black dress that Sophie had insisted was essential for any professional woman's wardrobe. As she fastened her mother's silver pendant around her neck, the one gift she had from her father to her mother, Maria wheeled into the room, her eyes bright with excitement. "So tonight is the night?" she asked, watching Elena apply a touch of lipstick. "It's just dinner," Elena demurred, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. Maria smiled knowingly. See, just dinner, with a man who looks at you like you hung the moon." Elena couldn't suppress her own smile at her mother's accurate assessment. Alexander's regard had remained consistent throughout their professional collaboration, respectful, appreciative, with an undercurrent of deeper feeling that needed no explicit expression to be understood. The Meridian was everything Elena had imagined: understated elegance, impeccable service, and a hushed atmosphere that somehow managed to feel intimate rather than pretentious. Alexander was waiting at a corner table, rising as she approached. His eyes warmed appreciatively as they took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply, holding her chair. "Thank you," Elena replied, noticing he had chosen to wear the midnight blue tie that matched her eyes, a detail that suggested this evening held special significance for him as well. Their conversation flowed easily, as it always had, but with a new freedom now that their self-imposed waiting period had concluded. They spoke of future projects, shared ambitions, and personal hopes with equal openness. Elena found herself laughing more than she had in years, warmed by Alexander's subtle humor and genuine interest in her thoughts. After dessert, Alexander suggested a walk along the river park nearby. The night was clear and mild, the path illuminated by ornamental lights that reflected on the water's surface. They strolled in comfortable silence for a while before Alexander led her to a small pavilion overlooking the river. "3 months ago you accepted a new professional role," he said, turning to face her. "Tonight, I'm hoping you might consider another new role, one far more personal." Elena's breath caught as Alexander reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Her eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a stunning yet understated ring, a perfect oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the pavilion lights. "This was my grandmother's," Alexander explained, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. "She was the wisest person I've ever known, and she always told me I would recognize true love by how it made me want to be better, more generous, more purposeful, more fully myself." He took Elena's hand gently. "From that first moment in the airport when you offered to help a stranger, you've consistently inspired me to be better. You've brought warmth, perspective, and purpose into my life in ways I never expected. I love you, Elena Rodriguez, and I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." The world seemed to still around them as Elena absorbed his words. This brilliant, compassionate man who had transformed her life was now offering to share his life with her completely. The journey from their first meeting to this moment had been improbable yet somehow inevitable. Two people recognizing in each other qualities that complemented and enhanced their own best selves. "I love you too," she said softly, the words feeling both momentous and natural. And yes, I would be honored to be your wife." Alexander's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he drew her into his arms, their first kiss held the sweetness of long anticipation finally fulfilled, a promise of the partnership they would build together. Later that evening, as they shared the news with an ecstatic Maria, Elena reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her here. A chance encounter in an airport, a moment of compassion offered without expectation of return, a man who saw value where others saw invisibility. The ring caught the light as she embraced her mother, the sapphire's deep blue reminiscent of that midnight gown she'd worn the night something had shifted between them. From airport cleaner to executive to fiancé, each transformation had revealed a different facet of herself that had always existed, waiting only for the right circumstances to emerge. "Love has its own timing, Mija," Maria said softly, squeezing her daughter's hand. "And it appears yours arrived precisely when it was meant to." Elena smiled, glancing at Alexander as he spoke animatedly with Camilla about upgraded accessibility features for Maria's bathroom. His genuine care for her mother, his respect for her professional contributions, and his love for her as a whole person had created the rarest kind of partnership, one built on mutual growth and shared purpose. What had begun as an extraordinary job offer had evolved into something far more meaningful, a future neither of them could have imagined that early morning in Terminal C when a heart medication and an act of kindness had opened the door to possibility. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.